My goodness, we're in the teeth of the storm here today. I don't know if you can hear the wind outside, but it's Storm Bert raging all about us. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another one. I was looking at my film camera collection the other day and it occurred to me there is not a great deal of difference between this 1932 Leica and this 1980s Olympus OM2. There are, 50, 60 years between them, but they are essentially a similar thing. Both of them are a light type box with a shutter, a viewfinder, and a place to put the film, and that's pretty much what they are. One's a rangefinder, one's an SLR, one's manual, one's got early auto exposure, but those fairly minor differences aside, I would suggest that there isn't a great deal of difference essentially between these two. However, let's fast forward just a little, and I picked up a couple of digital cameras. I've got the trusty old Panasonic GH2 here and the very wonderful, very beautiful Fujifilm X-T3 here. Now, there is a very large difference between these two cameras. There's about 10 years or so between them, maybe a little more, but there is an enormous difference between them in terms of tech, in terms of what they can do, in terms of file types, range of adjustments, quality of image, megapixel count of image. So there's a huge technical difference between these two cameras, and it just shows us how the market has changed. Now, one very fundamental change in the camera market that I think is partly responsible for causing this difference in the rate of development between the film camera years and the digital years. One reason I think for that difference is that the point and shoot market has completely gone. Back in the day, in the days of film, anybody who wanted to make an image, who wanted to take a photograph, had to do it using a film camera and some film, usually 35mm film. So the point and shoot market catered for a very wide range of people who didn't really want a very serious camera like an SLR or a rangefinder. They just wanted something simple that would make nice family shots and record family occasions, holidays, that kind of thing. So the point and shoot market was immense. And even in the digital years, even in the early digital years, there were, of course, digital point and shoots. And that market was very big also until the advent of camera phones. And camera phones have completely dried up the point and shoot market. Why would anyone buy a point and shoot camera when they have a very powerful camera right in their pocket? And phone cameras have now got very, very powerful. They don't do shallow depth of field too well except by digital simulation, but they are, as cameras, as point and shoots, they are absolutely peerless. They're without equal. They are very, very fine cameras. So that market's gone, and that means there's a vastly decreased number of people who are actually buying cameras, because by far the larger part of the camera market in the old days was the point and shoot market. Most people didn't buy SLRs, didn't buy rangefinders. Most everyday casual photographers, family type photographers, always bought point and shoots, or almost always anyway. So there are a lot less people buying cameras now. As well as that, camera manufacturers are no longer selling film. Not all camera manufacturers made film, but several did, and that was a great business model, because if you sell a camera to somebody, eventually, it doesn't matter how infrequently, eventually they will have to buy some film to put in that camera, and then eventually again that film will have to be replaced with another film. So there was a constant revenue stream from film, That's all died up as well, apart from a company like Kodak, who seems to have cornered the market in film production and selling, so that market's very different. But any manufacturer who used to sell film, except from Kodak, now no longer does. So all of this means that to make a reasonable amount of money from cameras, manufacturers have to keep selling more and more different models loaded with newer and newer features that I would guess many of us don't actually use that much. There's a huge amount of tech on this Fujifilm X-T3 here of mine, and there are, gosh, almost endless menus for this adjustment and that adjustment. Most of them I just don't use. Obviously, I know my way around the menu. I know how to adjust the camera and how to use it and how to get to the functions that I need to get to, but most of the stuff on the menu I really don't go anywhere near. I'm not entirely sure what it's for. I'd have to sit down and really study up to use those extra features, and I suspect I'd probably end up not really needing them. And I also suspect I might not be on my own there. So in order to make money, camera manufacturers have to keep selling us newer and newer models. Think back to the 70s, if you were around then. How many new cameras came out per year? Very, very few. The Olympus OM2 here, this was released during the 80s. This was the next model on from the OM1, surprise, surprise. But there was about a decade in between those two cameras. Maybe not quite a decade, but several years in between those two cameras. And manufacturers just didn't release models at the rate that they release them now. It's really quite a dizzying rate that camera manufacturers release new models at. Look at, for example, the Sony A7 series. We had the A7, the 7R, the 7S, then the 2R and S and A7, and then the A7 III, and then the 3R and the 3S, and so on, right up to the 5. We've also got the A1, the A9, the A7C, the A7C2. A bewildering range and variety of models, each of which can do one thing slightly better than another model over here can do it. This model's good for video, this model's good for stills, and all the manufacturers do this. Panasonic do it, not quite to the same extent. Sony certainly do it. Canon do it. Most of the manufacturers do it. Fujifilm certainly does it. And you end up with this enormous range of models, new releases every year, new tech every year, and more temptations, this carrot held out to us. You know, we have this new tech, this new development, and you just can't do without it. We have IBIS and you just can't do without it. We have so many stops of dynamic range now, and you just can't do without it. And so we're getting these newer and newer and probably smaller and smaller features every year to tempt us into buying new models. Let's add to that the idea that was floated by the managing director of Fujifilm France recently. I'm afraid I've forgotten the gentleman's name. I'll put it on the screen. He said that, in his opinion, young people are not buying cameras in the way that they used to. So, you know, in his opinion, I don't know whether it's true, but this is the idea that young people are not sort of, you know, seeing, gosh, this is a dream camera, the Fujifilm X-T4 or 5, I really want that, I'll save up my pennies for it and I'll buy it and I'll use it. Like I did when I was younger, young people are not doing this apparently anymore. They're not buying cameras in the same way that they used to, and so we've ended up with a situation where we've got far too many cameras chasing too few customers. If that's correct, let's assume it is. We've got that situation, too many cameras and too few customers. So what does this all mean for the camera industry? Well, I don't know. I know that Fujifilm have just released a camera that is targeted to vloggers, the XM5, that doesn't have a viewfinder and it's sort of video centric. So where the camera industry will go, I don't know, but what I do know is the kind of mirrorless camera that I would like to see. And I very much doubt whether any designers or industry people will take note, but if you're watching, do consider it. It might be worth consideration. Here's my idea for the perfect mirrorless camera, at least perfect for me, and a camera that would perhaps give the industry a little bit of direction. And at the very least, it's an interesting academic exercise. Let me know whether this is the kind of camera you would like to buy. What's your ideal mirrorless camera? Here's mine. So first of all then, my perfect mirrorless camera would need to have a full frame sensor. I have micro four thirds cameras and an APS-C camera, and I really love them, they're great, but a full frame sensor means that any vintage lenses you shoot are going to shoot the same as they did on a 35mm film camera. So it's important for me to have that larger sensor if I'm shooting vintage lenses, which I do an awful lot of. Most of the lenses I shoot are vintage lenses, lenses that I shoot in my spare time just for fun, lenses that I shoot for the channel. Most of the lenses I shoot are vintage, and I don't have many modern lenses, so that's why I would need a full frame sensor, and that would be a very important element in my perfect mirrorless camera. That full frame sensor ideally would not be a Bayer sensor. It would be something like the X-Trans sensor from Fuji, where the red, green and blue pixels are scattered over the surface of the sensor in a slightly more random-ish manner. It's not random, but it reproduces some of the feel of the randomness of film grains, unlike the Bayer sensor. So a full frame sensor, something like the Fuji sensor in the XT cameras. It would need to have film simulations, and I've got these from the Fuji cameras. Obviously I love my Fuji cameras, my XT1, 2 and 3 that I've got now, the 3 I've got now. And those film simulations are just beautiful. If you've never used one, you don't know what you're missing. They are absolutely fantastic. They are more or less true to the original film stock, but that doesn't matter too much. They're beautiful looking images in themselves. Now, personally, I know this might surprise one or two people, but I never shoot RAW. I just don't shoot RAW. I'm not into taking a whole bunch of shots and then going home and doing work on them. If I take a shot, I need it to be good straight out of camera, like it would be rather if you're using a film camera like this. You take film in, you get it developed, and you get your shots straight out of camera, and there's no mucking about needed with Lightroom or RAW therapy or any of these other things, which are brilliant pieces of software, but I just don't have the time or the inclination to spend hours and hours doing editing. So straight out of camera JPEGs, good ones, are what I'm interested in, and to do that, this ideal mirrorless camera would need film simulations. So maybe a manufacturer could do a deal with Kodak perhaps, although they might be funny about that. That might cut into their sales, but there's lots of other old film manufacturers. Agfa springs to mind, Konica. I'm sure some enterprising manufacturer could do a deal to get the look of those film stocks and use the trade names of those old film stocks. So that would be important also. This camera would need to have physical controls. I do not like diving through menus. I find it irksome, bothersome, and just downright difficult. It's far, far easier to have a bunch of dials on the top deck of your camera in the manner of this Fujifilm X-T1. Just check that out, have a quick look at that. That is how I would like my ideal camera top deck to look, with actual physical controls for the most used functions like shutter speed, aperture, ISO setting, and so on. It's important to have physical dials and two control wheels as well, one front, one back. That's an important thing. Any digital camera needs a menu, of course, so obviously there would be a menu system in this camera, but it would be a simple one. It would be a cut down one with only the main important functions needed. It wouldn't have just sort of infinite streams of possibilities and choices of focus, infinite streams and possibilities of, I don't know, dynamic range or any other setting. Think of any other setting you can think of. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages, or maybe they're not that many, but there are a great many pages, you know, certainly getting on for 100 in any menu system of any camera that I've used, and they are bewildering and they are perplexing and they're not a great interface, most of them. Most of them are difficult to use and they're loaded up with a lot of stuff. So a nice simple menu, like, as I understand it, I've never used one, but like the Leica digital rangefinders have, that is the way to go. Simple menu with not too many functions in it. The camera would need to be small and light. Small and light is important. It's what attracted me and still attracts me to this little Leica rangefinder here. It's a tiny little thing. That's why I like the Olympus OM2. It's why I like the Sony A7C. Smaller for me is always better. Lighter for me is always better. Smaller's better because it means you're not taking an enormous package with you. Lighter's better because, you know, you don't want to carry a heavy thing around with you. And if you've got any physical problem at all, a lighter camera is always better. If you've got bad joints or any problems with your back or anything of that sort, a lighter camera is always better. So small and light is really, really important. So ideally, yeah, about the size of this little Leica here, or the Sony A7C that I'm shooting on at the moment. That size would be ideal. No bigger, please, for my ideal mirrorless camera. It would need to have a flippy screen. That's a really important thing, and that's a deal breaker for me. I know a lot of photographers excuse me, are not into flippy screens, preferring a nice fold out angular screen on the back. I like to shoot video. I love to shoot video. Not only do I do it for YouTube, I do it for fun as well. And as well as that, I also like to shoot stills. So the camera that I use should be equally good at video and also at stills, because I use both those functions equally. My goodness, we're in the teeth of the storm here today. I don't know if you can hear the wind outside, but it's Storm Bert raging all about us. My ideal mirrorless camera would need to have IBIS that works properly. IBIS is great for video if it works properly, if you've got a good enough system that the sensor will be able to counteract all those little movements. So a good stabilization system for video, and good IBIS for stills as well, because before I got my Sony A7C, I'd never had a camera with IBIS before, or at least not used one long term, and it really is great for getting those low light shots that you wouldn't otherwise get handheld at, I don't know, a 30th or a 20th of a second. IBIS really helps in those situations, and a good IBIS system really helps with video also, so that is an important element. Ideally, and ideally is the word, it would need to have global scan, so you don't get any jelly shutter on video. That's a thing that has tripped me up on shots in the past. I've tried to get a shot, I've got a lovely tracking shot for example, but I've not been able to use it because all the lines have been bent over to one side as I've panned the camera or as the camera's moved. So global scan please, that is another important thing for my perfect mirrorless camera, and around about 25 megapixels of resolution. I really don't think you need any more than that. Cameras these days go up to 30, 40, 50 megs of resolution. For me, I don't personally need any more than about 24, 25. That's perfectly all right for my purposes. So that is my thoughts, my design plan, my rough sketch of the ideal mirrorless camera. Let me know if you agree with those ideas. Let me know if your ideal mirrorless camera would be a bit different. Let me know if you think mirrorless cameras are getting a bit too complex, and let me know where you think photography is going. All comments will be appreciated and I will answer as many of them as I can. But as for me, that is it for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in and for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you found these cogitations entertaining and maybe even useful. Many, many thanks to subscribers. Thank you very, very much for your support. I really appreciate that. If you've enjoyed this episode, do chuck us a sub. That would be appreciated. Also, many, many thanks to patrons for your support. Without that support, I couldn't make this show in the way that I do. So many, many thanks for that support. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in, watched, thanked, given thanks, super thanks, or engaged with the channel in any way. I do appreciate it all. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in. And if you're not doing anything too annoying, irksome or bothersome, next week at around this time, why not tune in and join me for a spot more Zenography. As for now, from me, cheerio all. See you next time.